Hey y'all, it's Laura. Welcome back to another Cocoa Vanilla Studio video. This time we are scrapping with the Happy Days collection, which is the newest one from Cocoa Vanilla. And I really wanted to scrap a photo from my recent graduation. And in this particular photo, there is not a lot of color. There are a lot of black and navy and just one little stripe of red. There's just not a lot of color in this photo. And I decided, you know what? I am going to use a ton of color in this particular layout just to show you that you don't have to take inspiration from the photo in order to scrap a photo. Particularly when your photo is like this, it's very muted, it's very dark, there's just not a lot of details and colors to really pull from. You can go wild in the background when your photo is so neutral. And one of the ways that you get away with this is because I'm using light and bright colors. The nice, bold, rich, dark colors in the photo will still allow it to pop up and be the center of attention. There's no need to worry about all of the bits and pieces in the background taking away focus on this photo when I am not using the dark colors in the photo. And it does all have a little bit of cohesiveness because there is a lot of navy in this gorgeous collection. And of course, my gown and cap there are navy as well. And so that works out quite well in creating a cohesiveness between the photo and the layout itself. But still, I will have the freedom and independence to create with lots of different colors in the background, and that is something I was excited to do. So I have these beautiful frames that I've cut out from the specialty paper in Happy Days. Absolutely love these gold frames. They're so pretty, and they glimmer beautifully in my lights, which was really fun. And I'm going to go ahead and back all of them onto these 3-color papers from the A5 paper stack. So just a little bit of navy, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of white with some hearts, and then I'm going to use this gorgeous rainbow stripe to map my photo. Now I won't be able to get all of the colors on it, obviously, but I decided to just stick with the blue end of the spectrum and limit my color scheme just a little bit on these basic mattes. That way I had a bit of a cohesiveness to work from, a little bit of a palette to start from, and I could add more color later, but these basic colors work really nicely with my photo. So to start with, I am going to go ahead and create a vertical line of my frames to create a background. And at first I thought, oh, well, I'll just group them behind my photo. But this vertical line using such a large 4x6 photo that is portrait style that really works with the photo instead of working against it. And so I decided to play around with the design and see what I could make with just the frames I had. I didn't want to use all of the frames on one layout, and so I did decide to just trim them down and tuck them in around the photo and make them work, kind of jigsaw puzzle them together to create this vertical background stripe. And it worked out quite nicely. It did take me a little bit of time to sort out how exactly to get those specific shapes together, but once I did, I really liked the overall look of this layout. This one was really fun, and I just had to play with it. A lot of times when I begin scrapping, I have a general concept of what I want to use, either the papers or the embellishments. I'll have just kind of a general idea, but not necessarily the entire layout mapped out in my head. I like to give my brain a little bit of space to play, a little bit of space to step outside of the normal linear box and see what sort of more whimsical ideas I can come up with while I'm actually touching all of the bits and pieces. And I think that for someone like me who tends to be less than planned, I don't plan much of anything. And so it helps to give myself the freedom to go a little wild and play around and experiment and audition things in certain places and see if I like them, rather than to map out the entire layout ahead of time and just simply follow the plan. That's just not really my style in any part of my life. And so for this particular layout, I think that's illustrated rather perfectly. And sometimes that means that the layout takes a little bit longer to make, and sometimes that means it comes together even faster because I'll find something that I hadn't thought of and I get so excited about it that I just jump on it. I was like, yes, this is what we're doing. Absolutely, this is what we're doing. So this is more or less the shape I decided to go with. I brought in these beautiful cut aparts and I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle those in. There was this tiny frame from the ephemera pack that was sitting in the cut aparts, and so I decided to pop that in here too. And then I'm just pulling bits and pieces from my desk. Now, before I begin a new collection for Cocoa Vanilla, or really any collection in my stash, I do tend to cut up a few things to make it quick and easy to use, and one of those things is always the cut aparts. I cut up the 12 by 12 cut aparts and the A5 version because all of the beautiful bits and pieces work perfectly as embellishments, and quite often those cut aparts can extend the life of your collections so far in such beautiful ways. I also tend to do a lot of fussy cutting, so if there are any sort of floral papers, I'll have a look at them and see if I can fussy cut them before I start diving into the collection. And typically butterflies or any sort of shapes like circles or diamonds or things like that, I'll cut up a few of them, at least enough for one layout, because having those pre-cut makes the entire process so much easier for me. I just find that it saves me so much time and so much fussing around while I'm scrapping. And I just really, really prefer that. When I sit down to scrap, I don't normally have a lot of time, usually have about an hour. And so I don't want to spend most of that time cutting into little tiny pieces of paper. I really want to spend most of it assembling, auditioning, playing around, experimenting. I want to just fully embrace that creative side at that time. Whereas I can do the beautiful fussy cutting later when I don't have a brain that is working in the creative field. I can sit mindlessly and watch YouTube or television and be fussy cutting at the same time. So kind of multitasking in my leisure time. And I find that is very, very effective. It works really well for me. I do have ADHD, so having something that keeps my hands busy while I'm doing something mindless like watching TV is very satisfying to my brain. And so that is a system that works for me. Now you may feel like, no, I don't want to do all that fussy cutting ahead of time because what if I don't use all of those florals? I'd rather have the full papers. That's entirely valid. That's an excellent perspective. I just know myself and I don't tend to use full pages of florals except as fussy cut elements. And I think that's a really important thing to consider when you are evaluating your scrappy style is how do you use things? How do you use your supplies and trying to arrange your scrapping time and your scrapping space to accommodate the way that you scrap, because there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all for everyone. So I did bring in some embellishments from the ephemera pack, and I've just kind of tucked them into clusters around and inside of my frames. This keeps all of my embellishing nice and tight, close to my photos, and it establishes it as part of the background, and that helps to keep my photo in the foreground so that it is still the focal image. I did find this beautiful little, it's kind of like a little flag or like a banner you would find at like a state fair. When you were in school, you get a ribbon, first place, and it had a heart on it. And I thought that was kind of perfect for a diploma receiving photo like this because it is an award of sorts. And awards are earned. And let me tell you, this degree was earned. I started this degree about 20 years ago and did not work on it for very long periods of time in between, but it was so incredibly satisfying and so incredibly motivating to finish this degree and to know that I have the capacity to move on in the world in a job that could potentially support my whole family on my own. Like there's just something about that sort of independence that really, really made me feel good. And it was very exciting to walk across that stage finally, after 20 years. Now, this beautiful little template is just a stencil, and if you're familiar with these sort of writing stencils or journaling stencils, this one in particular a friend sent to me, and it is amazing. I love the journaling genies. They're so much fun. They're probably one of those things that have been discontinued a long time ago, but the idea of having this sort of journaling space that is designed onto the page and was made specifically for journaling, especially on a layout like this where you've got the space to do it, it's just really fun. It's kind of nostalgic. It's something I haven't done in a very long time, but it's something I also really enjoy. I will quite often do this sort of thing with shapes. I will use a whole background of punched hexagons, and then I'll use one of those hexagons and trace it onto the page, and then instead of inserting that hexagon, I will then use that space that has been traced out to create my journaling spot right into the design on the background. And that's the concept here as well. It's just incorporating an image and a shape that fits in well with the design of the layout and then adding your journaling on top. So in this case, I have this beautiful sort of scroll looking design on the template, and I started it at the top and had to flip it upside down because of course it's just a half image. It wasn't a full image. And by doing that, I've created this really fun text spot to put all of my writing about how excited I was to receive this diploma, and it also kind of gives a nod to the diploma with its shape. Now, I will fill in some of the gaps because it is a stencil. There are some little gaps there to retain the integrity of the stencil and keep it nice and well formed. And so I'll fill in some of those gaps later with my pen, but I also wanted to use some florals at the top left and the bottom right just to add a little bit of fun. And the colors in these florals, again, a lot of these are fussy cut florals. I think the ones at the top of my embellishment tray were from the floral ephemera pack, and I just trimmed off the white edge, and then the ones in the middle were fussy cut from the pattern papers, and at the bottom, of course, we have those beautiful frames that I started with and the butterflies. So as you can see, I keep this embellishment tray along with this collection while I'm using it, while it's out and actively on my desk to be used, and this allows me a lot of freedom to just grab little bits and pieces and add them onto my layout without too much more work added in. It just becomes a very, very simple process for me. I did go ahead and color in a lot of the gaps on this particular template, and I think that adds a lot of definition that it needed. And then I'm going to beautifully cluster some florals together in that corner just to bring in a cohesive element to the other side of the layout. So those bright, bold colors are reflected on both sides of the layout, and it sort of closes the gap between them, and it helps my journaling sort of just smoothly fit in with the rest of the layout. So I really, really enjoyed scrapping this layout, and once I started it, it just sort of came together all on its own very quickly, and I was very, very excited for that to happen because it doesn't happen all of the time, and sometimes experiments do go awry, but I think that you need to give yourself that sort of freedom when you're scrapping to try things and to make mistakes, because making mistakes is how we learn, and it's okay to make mistakes because you can always cover it up. You can always try something new. You can always move it around. I typically like to make sure that everything is where I want it before I tape and glue things down, but I do that in stages. So I put all of the frames down, taped and glued them down first, and then added my embellishing. So no matter how I decided to embellish, my background stayed in place. Finishing up this layout, I am doing my typical scattering and splattering technique where I use some tiny little embellishments around the page, namely some little bitty hearts and butterflies, and then I'm going to come in with the puffy stickers from the Happy Days collection, and I'll add those on as well, and that is going to put a little bit more detail onto the page and kind of takes my layout from lovely to fantastic to a layout that I'm excited to see. Those little details make such a big difference. For the splattering stage in my layout, I always use 2 levels of splattering. I say always. I would say 98% of the time I use 2 levels of splattering. One, I come in with the Nuvo drops for some controlled splatter. In this case, I'm using it largely to create some little butterfly trails behind the butterflies in my background. Those butterfly trails add some movement as well as tie together some of the separate pieces of these frames together, connecting them with this little line. But I'll also dot them around the page, a lot like you might use enamel dots, but much, much smaller. So really it is a controlled splatter landing right where I want it. I'll then come in with some gold ink spray and do an uncontrolled splatter. And I do try to cover my photo, but unfortunately, I get very excited to do the splattering, and sometimes it does land on my photo, which it did today. But that's it for this one, guys. Be sure to check out the blog, cocovanilla.com.au, and until next time, bye y'all.